All right, so in this video, we're going to go over changing the IP address on the VSE, as well as just some of the preliminary parameter setups. So we can next jump into creating objects. So I'm still connected from the last video here. You'll see it there. Again, no one's probably going to want this to be their default IP address on the VSE. You can leave it that way if we're just using the outputs and occasionally coming back and connecting to it. But if we're going to put this on a network for any reason, we want to click on the configuration tab here. I want to go down here and let's say change your IP address to be a 3 instead of a 1. And then we'd hit the right settings to the device. Once that's written, it's going to reboot the VSE. There we go. And onwards and upwards from there. So one last thing to note, the field bus options of the VSEs, they do have an additional tab right here that's going to allow you to make changes to the field bus network settings. So let's then go to our parameter set underneath the VSE. We're going to double click parameter. It's going to open this tab here for us. And before we get started on setting up any objects, we need to go to the inputs. We need to set up or activate the sensor connections that we want to make. In this video here, I'm just going to go over sensor 1. Depending on how many sensors you have, you just want to click on each one, go up, click activate. Give it a name if you would like. Sensor 1 typically works. Here you can select from the different VSAs we offer, or an IEP accelerometer, or you could bring in a DC current, such as a 4020 signal, if you needed to. Um, we leave this as is right here by default, and the analog inputs here, we have N1 and N2 to work with. So typically, if we have a variable speed motor, we're going to set up a analog in and scale what that means to the RPM range, or we could do a pulsed input. Just activate this N1 to give us an example. So we can do that. Current, use a totalizer, we could do a pulse. You can change the engineering units if you want. If you just have a single flag per revolution, we can put that in here as well. As long as that is active, we're good. External inputs, whole other subject. We're going over just the basics today. The next thing would be triggers. So great, we set up to bring in this information from N1, and triggers is where we make it an active trigger that we can reference for our objects. So we right click here and select new trigger. We can do the analog input. Like I said, if you have a variable speed motor, then we definitely want to set this up. If we have an application where we have a constant speed and we know what that constant speed is, we can type that in and not need to bring in an analog signal or a pulse signal to get that speed. Okay. Triggers are required for unbalanced objects, bearing objects, and depending on how you set up the other objects in there, you may want to reference them as well. So this is the general setup that takes you right down to objects. Now, before we get to objects, which will be a separate video, one last thing to note here is going to be these changes we've made to triggers and inputs and setup. These have only been made inside of the VES software itself. We have not written them to the hardware yet. So we want to make sure that we come up, and every time we make a change in this software, we want to come up and write the parameter set to the VSE. All right, and then next time, we're going to get into creating some objects in the rest of the steps. Thank you, and have a good day.